Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? By the way, I muted you all, but you have the power to unmute yourself. So as we get more and more familiar with this platform, so Catherine, answer your question. I'm not sure if your mic's working or not. I can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself and test it real quick. But otherwise, we're gonna just wait for opportunities to ask questions. And today, I just wanted to thank you for being here and giving me the opportunity to contribute to you with these distinctions. They're, I think, some of the most important, but some of the least talked about in terms of people in business and solopreneurs and as you're building your business. And it's the primary component that I certainly deal with all of my clients, and which is why there's a phase one. And phase one's always about clearing out emotions, and then at the end we begin to work on self-esteem distinctions. So this is some really juicy stuff for me. It can get really geeky. My intention is to have it grounded, though, in practical things for you as you move through your day-to-day life and business, and as you're building your business. This next series of webinars is going to be 4 or 5 webinars and a couple of live events in person, are all in support of a course beginning in March that you'll hear about soon. Actually, you'll hear about it this evening. Begins March 21st. And it is for sexual healers or healers and practitioners in the relationship or love domain to help them build their business, help them really integrate their purpose and their prosperity so that we can all create a better planet. So having said that, today we got about an hour, and I'm going to lay down some distinctions for you. You can ask questions at any time. The most effective way to ask questions would be to put them in the chat window like Catherine just did. I don't know if you can all see that, but that's the most effective way. And I may just open it up, and unmute everybody, but that can get sort of chaotic. So the more questions you ask, the more you'll get out of it. There's so many things that I don't even think to put down. Some of you who've taken some of my courses or worked with me, that I go, oh yeah, there's this thing. And, you ask a question, I go on for a half hour. So there's 24 years of personal development and business experience in this noggin and in here. So the more questions you ask, the more you'll get out of that. At the end, I'll talk about the course really quickly, but this is really all going to be value, and the other ones are going to be more solid business nuts and bolts and how to actually create packages and certain aspects of presentations you need to make sure that you are acquiring clients from the presentation, all sorts of things that will really help you leverage your opportunities every time you're in contact with people. So if there's no questions, I don't need to tell you where the bathroom is. You have your own space. Let's get into it. Feeling worthy, your foundation for success. What is self-esteem and why is it so important? And in my experience, it's one of the most overused. That and codependence is the other overused word or phrase or term in pop psychology today, and one of the least understood, one of the most poorly understood. And so we just, 90% of philosophy is defining your terms, your definitions. So we're going to start there. And some people ask, well, what's it doing in a business training? For some of you, that may be obvious. It's like, well, I know how to do it, but I'm not doing it for some reason. And I'm scared to put myself out there. It's really obvious that there's something about your perception of yourself that's getting in the way. For others, it's, not nearly as obvious. And I've had a lot of people, want me to just skip over the emotional aspect, which is always module 1. You have to start there. You have to start there with stuff you picked up from your parents and clearing out fear out of your nervous system and, having structures to deal with frustration and anger, all those things first in place and cleaned out. And then you can actually go ahead and put yourself out there. Or it's a lot easier. I'll say it's a lot gentler on your nervous system. I've seen so many people try to skip over this component and they end up just quitting the business, or they all seem to drop off at a certain point, and it's usually when they need to start doing their presentations. So self-esteem is just such a critical thing, and we'll explain exactly how it integrates into your business. There's no personal or interpersonal issue The caveat is except those with a biological source. So if you have a brain chemistry imbalance, then self-esteem is not affecting that. Although self-esteem will affect your brain chemistry positively. But there's no interpersonal issue or personal issue that's not affected in some way, usually in large part by our esteem or how we hold ourselves. From fear and anxiety to staying in unhealthy relationships too long, for not being able to ask what you're worth, drug addiction, alcoholism, and other choices that don't really serve you, or not really fully living your purpose in some way, or playing small, or not telling the truth. I mean, for me, it shows up in so many people. They're either not telling the truth, or they can't hear the truth. They react strongly to it as a defense mechanism, and that's because they're, for one thing, they have external validation going. Oh, actually, we'll get into that. So definitions. The state of California created a task force around self-esteem, which I just found out a couple months ago. I thought this was fascinating. It's back in 1990. And they spent 3 years studying self-esteem. And they came up with this definition: appreciating my own worth and importance, and having the character to be accountable for myself and to act responsibly toward others. It's a very good definition. We could work with that definition. Here's Dr. Brandon's definition. I'm just borrowing heavily from his work. I've expanded on his work and his distinctions. Although he passed away about a week ago, I think. But here's his definition. He spent, most of the last 40 years writing about self-esteem and largely correcting other people's misperceptions about it. It's the disposition to experience oneself as competent to cope with life's challenges and being worthy of happiness. I think his original definition says something like you feeling you're appropriate to life, that last part, your knowledge of your efficacy and that you're appropriate to life. One, that that you're competent, and the other is that you deserve, or you're worthy of receiving a good relationship, the money that you earn, a good life, like that you feel you're worthy of receiving it. The definition implies not just being worthy of respect, but also having the basic skills and competencies required to be successful in life. I'm sure you've met somebody who just doesn't have the capacities to move through life, and you see them once in a while. I for some reason I have this woman at the post office who she was helping me. She was behind the counter, and I could just tell that life was really challenging for her. She wasn't sure I was giving her some money, and she just couldn't count it. She counted it 3 or 4 times, and I'd laid it out for her. I'd flipped the bills over, so that they were like this stack of 5, this stack of 5. Made it as simple for her as possible. And yet, and she got angry with me. I was being very, very polite and it's because all of her self-esteem issues were triggered. And what that means is her sense that she's not competent for life was triggered. And that's pretty scary. You can imagine what that's like for people. And maybe you've experienced that yourself at some point. And most of us have felt incompetent in some context. By the way, I'd like to bring back incompetent as something that doesn't have any moral valence, or ignorant. Also, I'm just ignorant about it. I just don't know. I haven't been exposed to knowledge about it. I think those are 2 words that we should bring back that don't need to have a negative connotation. But it's got to be a challenging experience. And the opposite experience, one that that you're going to handle it. You're going to figure it out. With confidence in your core that you'll find a way. That's a whole other experience, isn't it? And in that case, you're just, looking around, and it doesn't matter almost what happens. And the higher your self-esteem, the more certainty you'll have that even if you don't know how to figure it out right now, that you will find a way. You will gain the capacities you need to. And self-esteem is an experience. It's a particular way of experiencing the self. And it's a good deal more than a mere feeling. I'm not talking about feeling good about yourself. That's a extrapolation from self-esteem. It's like, well, I am therefore and that will, the lens through which you view that will change as you move through stages of ego development. But I don't want to overcomplicate things. But it does involve emotions, it involves evaluation, and it involves cognitive components. It's a fairly complex set of structures. And it entails certain dispositions, and they are these, that you move toward life rather than away from it. You expand rather than contract. You move toward consciousness. There's this idea that anytime you're faced with a choice, you have a choice to either, and it's a challenge. You can either increase your consciousness, increase your focus, increase your awareness, or you can go watch TV, or or whatever people do, eat, or have sex, or whatever it is that they do to or drink to numb out whatever it is that they need to move towards. It's a spectrum, by the way. This isn't digital. It's not on or off. It really is a spectrum. So when I started thinking about scales and waves and stages, analog like a dial, not digital like a switch, on or off. So it's a spectrum. And this is my favorite part. We treat facts with respect rather than denial. You have a healthy relationship to reality, essentially, and to operate self-responsibly rather than the opposite. So this shows up in a few ways in general as we move through the world. Asking for what you want, and it could be that you want to try something in the bedroom with your lover. It could be that you need something from a waiter, a service person. It could be really anything that you need to assert yourself around. You need to request something. You need to ask for something. And maybe you don't want to be a bother, or, who knows what, or maybe you just don't feel. So drawing healthy boundaries, saying no. I consider boundaries are your immune system, your energetic immune system. And some things are, people are going to not have the same boundaries as you. It's a way of respecting yourself. There's quite a few things, by the way, I just list under self-respect choice. One of them is drawing boundaries. It's a matter of self-respect. And you're not concerned. You get less and less concerned with what others think of you. And there's a few things. It allows you to hear feedback because you're not taking it personally. It allows you to give feedback because you're less wrapped up in whether or not they're going to like you or not afterwards. You're telling the truth. Again, facts become more important to you. And again, that's a spectrum. And there's, of course, variables. You want to make sure the person can hear it, and you want to, sometimes I time things especially for clients. I time when I'm sensing when they can hear it. They need this piece, and this piece, and then I can tell them this piece. There are things I see right away that there's no way I could tell them right away. Partly because we haven't cleared out the emotions yet, and their self-esteem is such that it would just do them irreparable harm if I just laid out all the truth. That's called being a jerk, I think is the technical term. It also allows you to self-correct more rapidly. You admit mistakes because you're interested in efficacy. It's not personal. And we'll get into personal and practical and the reason that distinction is so critical. And you'll treat others with greater kindness. And here's why. One of the reasons. You're not engaging in the pseudo self-esteem game of trying to make yourself feel good by putting other people down or being self-righteous or saying, yeah, I was better than that, better than you at that, or whatever. And you're also not beating yourself up. That's the flip side of that same stage. But people with high self-esteem, they're far from arrogant. They're supremely confident in their capacities, if their capacities are indeed there. But they're also truthful about where their limitations are. And they treat other people with grace and kindness. One of the things I used to do was just, when I first met somebody, I'd love to see how they treat service people, waiter or waitress, somebody who they'll never see again, who's supposed to, essentially be their servant for an hour. And it's tremendously revealing to see how people treat those people. And here's the primary thing. You make healthy and aligned choices with what you consume, who you're in a relationship with, and congruence when you are asking for what you need and what your value is. What do I mean by congruence? It means that you don't feel conflicted about it. Again, this is a spectrum, so it's not that you're supposed to feel aligned tomorrow. It's continual practice. It's constant. It's an infinite game. It's infinite evolution. So, what does this mean when you're in business for yourself? Well, you stop trying to prove anything, even to yourself, and you stop taking things personally. And here's one of my favorite things to say. It's not about you, it's about the work. People get so wrapped up in whether or not, I mean, I offer things all the time that people, don't take on. That's fine. I don't care. It's, they're not my outcomes, I like to say. Um, I had a client, I'll tell you a couple of client stories. I had a client one time, I have a 16-week video program that I haven't promoted in a couple of years, but it's sitting there and I give it to clients for free. And um, 16 weeks of, me talking for a couple hours a week, some pretty dense material, everything from how to build a website to, here's how to market on with using press releases. And this client who was fairly young too, late 20s, fantastic coach, extraordinary coach. And she said, "Oh, I know all that stuff." And she hadn't even really looked at it. And I didn't say anything because why would I say anything? First of all, it's not about me; it's about her outcomes. And second of all, I knew that would, eventually that would be funny for me to repeat that back to her. And it was about 4 months later. I said, "There's this thing you said," and she got a good laugh out of it. It's very funny, very funny. But you stop trying to prove anything. It's not about, it's not about me. It's about the work. Um, it's about, and it's about your client's evolution, whether that's solving their sexual shame, or whether that's, being able to connect deeply with a lover, or whether that's, finally getting that promotion, or whatever it is. Most of you are sexual healers, so a lot of it's going to be in that area. But just expressing what feels good to them. Sometimes I hear is a challenge for people, or just actually making any noise at all. Apparently, here's how else it shows up. You only work with those you're certain you can help. You're just clear. You're not worried about. You're not gonna waste time, and it is a waste of time attempting to fit a round peg in a square hole. You're going to simply offer what you can offer and be really clear about people. I tell people, if they say in an initial consultation that they want something that's outside of my area of expertise, I tell them, I say, yeah, that's not my area. These other things are, but this one is not, just to make sure that we're clear. And you're comfortable with money, and you're confident about your rates, and the idea of increasing them too. I don't think I've met a coach or a practitioner or a healer who wasn't below what I felt they should be charging, who wasn't charging too little. Usually it's about at least 10% too little. And by too little, I mean, what are other people in the marketplace charging? Um, I think it's a nice perspective shift to just to get that executive coaches start at $500 an hour. That's a standard rate. They usually meet for a half hour a week, but it's $500 an hour. So that's relatively, that's just accountability. It's right. It's high performance. It's state management. It's not very complex stuff, but the people who are investing in that market space is willing to pay that. They like to pay that. They look forward to paying it. They assume it's going to be at least that much. So there's a few things about rates, and we'll get into how to set your rates later on in the webinar series. But there's this idea that you don't set your rates at all, really, right? It's because if they'll pay what they're going to pay, and they won't pay what they're not going to pay. When I say they, I mean your specific targeted market. And somebody somewhere will pay something, always. So there's this combination of where you feel confident, and that translates, by the way, when you're talking to a client. When you're talking to a client and you're confident in your competence, when you know that you're good at what you do, you know that you're worth what you're asking for. That translates, and that translates to conversion rates. That translates to more people signing up, more people, because you are clearly relaxed. And when I say confident, by the way, I'm talking about the kind of quiet, relaxed confidence. You're soft, you're open, you're at ease because you're that good. These are all things that non-verbally are communicated to a prospective client and a client, and they feel held or not to degrees. So what does this really mean when you're a business for yourself? Well, you get more creative if you're constantly working on your self-esteem. There's also a few mindsets, several orientations, perspectives that you're going to take on. I'm reminded of somebody who was a client. They were offering some advice to somebody, and they got really they took it personally that they didn't take it. And we'll get into this distinction about personal and practical in a minute, but it's just another version of that, collapsing the two, collapsing efficacy and self-worth, because it doesn't mean anything about you in terms of your worth. Your value, though, is different. So here's the primary mindset, and this is brutal for some people. And you just repeat this to yourself: my life is the sum total of my choices. Bam. And the state of my business is the sum total of your choices, or of my choices. And just, think about that. Say it to yourself. Consider it. Notice what your reaction to it is. Notice whether you feel excited. Notice whether you feel burdened. Notice whether you feel free and liberated, or like you have choice, or if you feel like you're at fault, or you go into shame, or maybe you feel like you're not doing good enough, or you should have done this or should have done that, or the popular one for us in our 40s is, I'm supposed to be X, Y, and Z already. I'm supposed to publish this and accomplish that and have this thing and be known this way, and it doesn't happen. And the relationship to it, though, the relationship that we have, and this isn't the truth, by the way, it's just a game to play for your own self-esteem, building your self-esteem. Your life is the sum total of your choices, and the state of your business is the sum total of your choices. It's funny, a lot of people ask me, they go, how's business going? And I say, business is however I'm going. I don't believe in the holidays. I don't believe in the economy. I don't believe in any of those outside forces that people say, people just aren't blah, blah, blah right now. Now, sometimes that's true, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because the game that we play, the life is a game played between the ears. We act as if, there's something that we can do. There's possibilities out there, and that we are ultimately responsible. So no matter what happens, and no matter what happens, and I have some stories that will make you perhaps question this, or question me, but you can use this at any point about anything that happens to you or in your environment or interpersonally. The question, especially with clients, is ask yourself, how am I responsible? And then what can I learn? Or what structures can I put in place to correct the problem? This, by the way, has the added benefit of being the practice to dissolve anger. Anger requires blame, and blame and responsibility have trouble coexisting. In fact, they really can't coexist. So the more you take responsibility, the more the blame goes away, and the more power you have, really. But this is a practice, by the way. I assign my personal evolution clients after we dissolve anger, and I give them one other piece around it. Then this is the practice. Anytime you're angry, how am I responsible? Right? Imagine doing that every time you're angry. Right? Now, anger usually comes from a crossed boundary, or a broken expectation, broken agreement, those things. But they're all crossed boundaries. Sometimes you don't know that, and sometimes the other person's unaware of it. You haven't communicated it to them. But sometimes you have, and they're aware of it, and they do it anyway. And you have to then go, well, how am I responsible? Right? Now, it's such a strange thing to ask, right? It's clearly someone else's fault, right? It's like you had an agreement, they broke the agreement, around money or possessions or borrowing something or who knows what, or a relationship or something, somebody, polyamorous structure, broken agreement, or lied or something like that. And you have every right to be angry, right? But does it serve anything? And so the question is, how am I responsible? What can I learn? I play this game all the time, by the way, to all the way out. I was looking for I love dealing with service people who make about $15 an hour, because a lot of them are worth that. And there's a reason that they're in those jobs, and a lot of them are really great, and they're just doing something part-time while they're moving on to the next phase of their life. I was looking for a microphone for my phone. I was looking for a 3.5 millimeter plug with a boom microphone like this, right? And so I'm going around saying, on Market Street to all these locations, AT&T and T-Mobile, and all these stores that have all these accessories. And I kept saying, okay, it's got to have this kind of this kind of plug in 3.5 millimeter, and it needs to have a boom microphone, right, like this. And they keep handing me stuff that's not that, and just, furthest thing from it, right? And so I just looked at where could I communicate more clearly, right? Now, truth is, they, their IQ is just too low to be perhaps even working there. There's, or they weren't listening. They were just not present. Maybe they're super smart, but they're just not present. They're sort of on autopilot because the job's so easy. There's any number of things that I could point to, but I also don't get to have the wonderful experience of improving my communication no matter what situation I'm in. And if there's anything that you can make sure that you're always and forever improving on, it's your communication. I mean, if you want to deal with other people, if you don't want to interact with other humans, you don't need to do that. Then you just need to worry about how you communicate with yourself. But how am I responsible and what can I learn? That's the frame. And when is this most useful? When the low-hanging fruit of someone else being at fault is dangling right in front of you, and you want to get hit, and it is their fault. And that's the thing. It probably is. And so what? You don't gain anything from that. Your true power, your leverage in the world, in gaining competence and having opportunities, is in taking responsibility. Taking responsibility is also the quickest way that you can build your esteem for yourself or expand your ego in the healthy sense, meaning how much can you bear at once? You do that by taking on responsibility, whether that's an additional role in some project you're working on, or whether it's paying financially supporting yourself. I'm sure you've all seen something strange go on in relationships when there's a stay-at-home dad and he's not earning money, and the mother is. There's something strange starts to happen in their relationship, and it's it just seems to be sort of hardwired to people, especially to men, about earning their own living, so being able to support themselves. It's a funny thing, and there's really no neutral, by the way, in self-esteem. And you can blame someone else. It probably is their fault, like I said, but in doing so, you give all the power over to them, and they may not be competent to wield that power. So you want to keep it to yourself. The power for you to have the life that you want. So let's break down. First of all, any questions so far? Were you able to get the slides? Yes. That's a short answer. Rahaja. Any other questions so far before I get into some of the more subtle distinctions? Those are definitions and why you should care, how it applies. But I want to make sure that we get to some of these subtler distinctions. That may be true. Okay. Catherine says she has questions, but I might be answering them as I carry on. Probably. It's a good chance. Let's carry on. So we talked about the definition, the basic definition. Nathaniel Brannon, knowledge. You know that you're competent to handle the vicissitudes of life, and that you're worthy of happiness. We can break these down into self-efficacy and self-respect. Those two components, and if you think of these really as two columns, I have them, on top of each other. But if you think of them as two columns, the next few slides will make even more sense to you. So self-efficacy is your competence, your knowledge of your competence, and self-respect is your feeling that you're worthy of happiness. You could also think of this self-efficacy as your value, but self-respect is your worth. And I like to distinguish those two. Your self-worth, your worth is a settled matter. We're all divinity. You're all spirit manifest. You're all gods and goddesses. You're all holograms of the universe. You're all God's children. However, whichever metaphor you prefer, we all have equal worth. That's why we, try to save people in faraway lands and feed them when, we're not them or they're not part of our tribe or whatever. It's because we recognize that we all are spirit and that we all have equal worth. Your value, however, based on your competence, will vary wildly depending on the context, depending on the market, depending on your experience, depending on your level of competence, and depending on the perceived value of what you're competent in. There's so many things that that determine your value. And that's fluctuating all the time. It's fluctuating constantly, your value. Your value, even though you may not charge any differently, might be different one day than it is the next day with a client. One day you're amazing, the next day you're just pretty good. You know, but those two things are separate. People confuse them. People relate their self-worth to their finances, and that's not going to get you very far, no matter what your finances are like, because those shift. And if you're identified with anything, if you're identified at some level with your finances, and it doesn't matter if you're wealthy or poor, you're going to have a bad time. You want to disidentify from all of that. It's not you. You're none of that. And personal and practical. Practical is self-efficacy. Personal is self-respect. People make so many things personal that just don't need to be. And we'll get to why that happens. And it's collapsing validation and referencing, but it's also collapsing as practical and the personal. And so there's all sorts of practical things, and you just want to separate those out. Somebody gives you feedback, you want to thank them. You don't want to, feel like you're injured in some way. I mean, you can feel however you want to feel, but it doesn't serve you. You have to get through that. And if you separate the two out, and you do that by making sure that you're not making it mean anything about you as a human being. Shame is a perfect example of people going into, I have a 5-step thing called the chain of meaning, where something happens and then there's 3 more steps, but the final step leads to an atmosphere. Shame, despair, hopelessness, the really heavy ones, the thick ones. Those are all a result of somebody making it mean something about themselves as a person. Shame's a simple one, really what happens is something happens and they feel bad that they did that thing, but then they also, think that they're a bad person as a result. That's why guilt and shame are separate experiences. And a person with very high self-esteem, they just simply don't go there. You're inoculated against it. It's your immune system for life, is what Brandon calls it, or did call it at one point. And I really like that metaphor, because you're still going to get sick, but you bounce back much faster. And some things you just won't be, you're immune to some things. Other people will get sick, you won't. Self-efficacy is results. Self-respect is meaning. Guilt and shame, we covered that. Self-efficacy is guilt. Self-respect is where shame lives, that side of the column. Then here's something I've just cobbled together from a few different spaces. First of all, no one can harm your self-esteem. I always find it amusing when someone says, "Oh, this person hurt my self-esteem by saying that." Really? I thought it was self-esteem. Do you hold that opinion too? Right? Because the only way that someone else can harm your self-esteem, and actually, when I say the only way, they really can't at all. But you have to co-sign it. So the only way that can get in is if you go, "Yeah, I am a piece of whatever," and you have to agree with them. So at the end of the day, anything about someone else harming your self-perception, unless you're a small child and it's a parent and you have a fused identity with them. We're talking about adults here, just to be clear, or children over the age of 14 or wherever it is that they shift their sense of self internally instead of from mom and dad, or mom or dad. So based on the idea that we're adults, then you are the author and the authority of your self-concept, of your esteem for yourself. That's why it's called self-esteem, not other esteem. People's opinions of you won't matter in terms of meaning. They will matter in terms of results. And we'll get to that quadrant, that 4-quadrant thing in a second. Self-confidence and self-esteem are not the same thing. They're not. In fact, you can have very high self-esteem and your confidence will, sort of depend on your mood. Or you can have really high confidence, but it's actually a mask for low self-esteem, right? So it's the quiet certainty that you want. And self-confidence is how you feel about yourself at any given time. Self-esteem is the acceptance, the compassion, and the love you feel for the person that you are like just enjoying being you and loving yourself. That's self-esteem. It doesn't matter who else is watching. In fact, it's a very private, internal matter. Um, and as a side note, if you ever pass a mirror, I know that you will today, I always take the opportunity to look myself directly in the eye and say, I love you. It's a great experience to have. And there's lots of mirrors. There's your rearview mirror. There's the bathroom mirror. There's your vanity. There's, maybe there's one in the hallway. Just try it for a while. Make sure you look in one eye very directly. And your concept of self is a composite of what you choose to believe from all the input, positive and negative, you've received through your lifetime. But again, you've chosen to believe it. My father said all sorts of things to me, terrible things. And apparently I never believed them. I just, some of them didn't make sense. I was like, what? Worthless as tits on a bowl. What does that mean? Actually, I think I was 20 before I realized what the heck that meant. He'd been saying it to me since I was 12. Tits on a bowl. Anyway, good times. But you have to accept what they believe. Likewise, if somebody gives you a compliment and you deflect it, that is it's a similar thing. Now, you may have other reasons for deflecting. It may not be that you have low self-esteem. I've often deflected compliments because I just think it's a waste of time to talk about me. We're focused on the work, right? But as you mature in that, as I mature in that, you simply thank people. Thank you. It's all you need to say to a compliment is thank you. Graciously. That's it. It doesn't matter, what they've said. If it's a compliment, all you need to do is thank them. If it's critical feedback, you just thank them. But that time you thank them because that's actually valuable. Your self-esteem has nothing to do with your achievements. That's external validation. And rather, it's a collection of internal mechanisms that make those achievements occur. And I'll go further and flesh it out and say that self-confidence is a transient emotional state, whereas self-esteem is your grounding or your baseline. Self-esteem has no neutral, by the way. So every action you take, every decision you make either improves or undercuts your self-esteem. There is no neutral. Any decision you make involving life is either improving and building your self-esteem, or it's undercutting it. Okay. Aha! Let me look at some questions here. So far, this is how we see clearly that self-esteem around worth, ability, value is at the core of a lot of challenge for me. Yes, for most. I mentally can recognize this is not correct, but it's like I have this belief in my whole life. I'm not sure how to start changing it, where to begin. Yeah. Oh, it's not actually a question. Or is it? Yes, it is. Yeah. So there's a couple things. First of all, their practices. And I like to stress to people, especially to clients, that navigating your interiors, your ability to navigate your interiors, is a physical skill. And a lot of people, they go to a workshop or they read a book and then they're not doing that thing that they did in the workshop or the weekend. Usually they're like 3-day weekends that's going to transform your life, and it does, or so you think, until about Friday of that week, and you realize that everything's back to the way it was. Or maybe it takes 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Or maybe there's, a community and it lasts a month or two, with a community reinforcing it until, a lot of people sort of drift off. Integration is really underrated and not spoken to, partly because it's, I have it if you just speak to people like they're adults, like, look, it's going to take this much time. Like, here are the reasons why we're doing this. I think the government should talk to us like we're adults when they make foreign policy decisions rather than children. And just say, look, this is what's going to happen, and here's why, and this is the real reason, and it's a long-term thing, whatever. Or yes, we have this relationship with somebody where we don't think we should, but it's the least bad of all the bad options, and there's only bad options. just have that conversation. But maybe I'm overestimating people. But you just have to, know that it's going to take a while, and there are practices. And so what you're looking to do is you're looking to just decrease the amount of time between when you're doing that thing, or in your case, you're living into that belief. And when you go, oh, that's right, I'm not doing that, it's not correct, and you correct your thinking. But in the correcting of your thinking, you build a new pattern, a new habit. And the more you do that, the more habitual it becomes, until, you're doing things like simply interpreting things positively. It's just a habit now. It's like, oh, well, that means I have excellent taste. It's, you just are suddenly, that people say, Chad, that's a lot of money. You go, yeah, absolutely. I'm very proud of my rates. It communicates the value I bring to people's lives, right? Because people are paying it. But that's a different response than, and start to negotiate on money, or start to, ask them about their finances, or try to justify how it's worth that much. And you start to try to convince them, and then you've lost the conversion. So as a practitioner, you really want to make sure that, if they say that's a lot of money, you go, yeah, it is. Would you like more tea? So here's this 4-quadrant model I developed for self-esteem, because I thought that, the 2-dimensional thing just wasn't working. Well, this is still 2-dimensional, but you know what I mean. So with 4 quadrants, we have a lot more going on. On one axis, we have validation and worth. And on the other, we have efficacy or referencing. What do I mean by referencing? Where are you putting your attention for results, to adjust results? And then worth, where are you validating yourself? Like, I am valid. And what we want to do is we want to have validation, or the personal, be internal. It should be personal. Personal matters should be personal. So anytime you're determining your worth or validating yourself, like, you shouldn't care what I think of you. I don't want you to. I hope you don't. And you shouldn't care if I approve or disapprove, or, whatever. By the way, this is why I don't like the word disappointment. People are, oh, I'm so disappointed in you. You're not my parent, and I hope I never say that to somebody, that they disappointed me. It's so terrible. It's really kind of a manipulative frame. Like, I had these expectations and they didn't live up to them. It's an interesting thing, but it's trying to leverage external validation. If they're externally validated and they're holding me as the person that validates them, then first of all, you've given all of your power away. And second of all, you're going to be in misery all the time. The only way to be free from all that is to have your own self-worth internally validated. That means taking on the practice of any feedback is practical, and personal aspects, you keep those personal. They're your own opinions. But you still want to have your attention out there. You want to have your attention on them to see how effective you're being. So there's 4 different ways this can go. One is you're internally validated and internally referenced. That means you make up your own sense of validation and worth, and you can't really pay attention out there. You've got all your attention here. Well, you're probably going to run over a few people. It's not ideal. You're probably going to upset a few folks. So we want to have you internally validated but externally referenced. And then you could also be externally validated and externally referenced. This is what I like to call, it's a technical word, it's called hell. And that's where you've got all of your attention out there, and everybody out there is validating you. And so you're looking for approval all the time, and it's different for different people, and you have to sort of twist yourself into a pretzel. I mean, there's no way to live authentically that way. You may not even know what authentic living is. You may not even know who you are, because you're too busy trying to be who they want you to be. And that's just hell. It's really, it's, misery. You can't imagine what it's like to be there. And then there's being externally validated, but internally referenced. And I just like to say that these people are, socially inept, and they're going to have a lot of challenges. And you want to flip that around. Again, you want to be upper left-hand quadrant, internally validated and externally referenced. That's a practice. I'm sure any of us, we could plot, on this graph, we wouldn't be, all the way up in one corner. We'd be somewhere near the center. It just depends on which quadrant we'd be in. And it's something to have your attention on all the time. And to get A little bit more to your question, Catherine. The number one skill, the internal skill you want to develop, is the capacity to witness. And there's a few ways you can develop the capacity to witness. One is simply notice the top of your head right now. Just imagine the top of your head and notice, yourself over there or down there. If there's more than one person in the room, notice both of you. And you use the third person. Like I'm noticing Jason from up in the corner. That's a quick way to do it. The other way to do it, it really gets in your bones, is to go on a 10-day Vipassana retreat, and you'll certainly get it. I've been on 8 or 9 10-day Vipassana retreats, and they're fantastic. Of all the things I've learned, by the way, over the 24 years I've been engaged actively in mindful personal development, personal evolution, Vipassana is probably the best. If I had one thing I had to recommend, I don't have one thing, I have multiple things, but Vipassana. Yeah, Vipassana with a V. And I think that's the website you want to go to. I'm not sure if I'm spelling that right. There may be an additional letter in there. But anyway, and they're fantastic. You go on a 10-day retreat, and you're in silence, and you're observing your sensations in a very systematic way, guided, systematic way, for 10 days. It's fantastic. Anyway, that will get, if you don't have your capacity to witness strengthened by the end of that, then I'm an orangutan. You'll come out of that with great skill, and you want to deepen that. But there is no, and I don't actually care how you develop it. If you develop your capacity to witness, that is to self-observe, and still feel, though. You want to be an associated observer, not dissociated. That's the difference between what we call the third perceptual position in neurolinguistic programming, and witness, which I just call fourth, for lack of but it cuts across all 3 perceptual positions. And that's the other skill, is the ability to move through those perceptual positions at will. What am I feeling? Drop in an empathetic state with you, breathe with you for a minute, see what you're feeling, and then to observe us both from up in the corner. And then you have a more fully informed. But then if you occupy witness, which is to be embodied, but observing simultaneously, that skill, because then you can, metacognition, the ability to think about your thinking, is one of the great skills of any personal development path. And a lot of people go, oh, I do that all the time, it's terrible. I didn't say judge your thinking, but observe your thinking, think about your thinking, that piece. If you're judging it, then you're usually looking at it through the first perceptual position, and you want to be in witness. And witness, it just has a mild joy, it's just a light smile. Think of it as, the Buddha mind, in a way, or or even there's a childlike aspect to it. It's just, just happy to be there, and compassionate and cares. That space, occupy that space more and more with yourself. And then you'll see all this stuff, and then you can take corrective action much more rapidly. The one benefit of therapy is that you get to, I'm sure there's many benefits, but one benefit I've noticed, but you can get this fairly quickly, and you'll get it in Vipassana, is the capacity to observe, to witness your challenges, your problems, your internal struggles, and you can look at it out here, so that you're not in it. You get to pop it out, and you go, oh, it's over here. You're witnessing it. You get to talk about it out there. If you get that, that's great. You can stop doing therapy after that, unless you just want someone to talk to, or keep doing therapy. I don't know. Do whatever you like. Very quickly, rational self-doubt versus low self-esteem. If you've never done something before, you cannot have knowledge of your competence. You might have a belief or an assertion or something, but you won't have knowledge. So you might be nervous. Well, I'm not sure I can do this. Well, yeah, you're not, because you've never done it before. It's fine. But you've done other things well, and gotten good at things that you were not good at before. So, but rational self-doubt, if I asked you to land a plane and you've never flown before, and said, I'm in the tower, and I say, oh, you've got to land the plane. Pilot just keeled over, had a heart attack or something. You'd be nervous. That's not a self-esteem issue. That's you having rational self-doubt. So it is with anything like presenting for the first time, or you just have to do it. and do it a lot. Um, so here is what I'm going to suggest that you do. First, you want to develop your ego in the healthy sense. By the way, ego's fallen on bad times lately. I use ego in the positive sense. A lot of people talk about annihilating their ego. I think that creates tremendous internal dissonance. I mean, just imagine if you're talking about annihilating a part of yourself, actually the seed of your consciousness, which is your ego. It's the only way to get rid of your ego is to, you know, die. And we're not even sure if it goes away then, right? Nobody knows. But there's no way to annihilate your ego. There's all this talk about it. I think it's my experience that we expand it so that it gets diffuse. It's the small ego. It's the stage one ego that needs to be protected and asserted, right? It has to be this thing, right? Rational, it's more competence-based. Transrational ego, it gets to be much more diffuse. And what that means is it doesn't need to be asserted. It's so large, it's so healthy, but it's relaxed. It's at ease. It can absorb anything. It's like a body of water, like a lake. Whereas the pre-rational ego, the stage one ego, is like a really stiff tree that can get broken in the wind. And rational egos are a little bit, it's flexible. It can bend. It withstands more. But the water, you can toss anything in the water and it just absorbs it. But just think, all the spiritual traditions that talk about going to a non-dual reality where your self dissolves and you become essentially one with all things. Now, the kind of ego that become one with all things, that's a pretty big fucking ego. So, but again, it doesn't need to be asserted because there's nothing to prove. Why would you prove something that's so big? It's so self-evident. It's so obvious. So consider that. I've written a few pieces on self-esteem and ego that really kind of turn it on its head. And I think maybe there was a bad translation. Maybe it was just, the oral traditions got it wrong. Or maybe we've just evolved into understanding our interior structures a little bit better. But I assert that the idea of annihilating your ego is tantamount to psychological suicide. And you shouldn't do it. You should definitely expand it so it doesn't need to be protected. But you're not getting it on people either. You're embracing them with it, not throwing it on them. So anyway, there's a whole bunch of subtleties there. Take responsibility. Increase your consciousness when faced with life. This particularly shows if you're dealing with clients, I don't care what happens. Ask yourself, how am I responsible? What can I learn? Is there something you should have communicated? You could have communicated more clearly, that you should have informed them in advance. My client agreement is 5 pages long. It didn't start that way. It started out as 1 page, but something happened and I went, okay, well, how am I responsible for this occurring? Is it in the agreement? Nope. Well, I should put it in the agreement. Or is it in the initial thing I give them that says, basic principles and how to, no, it's not. I should add it to that so that they have it. They need to be made aware of all of your policies, things like that. I had somebody one time hold me accountable to a policy that they didn't tell me. They expected, I guess, I never got a business card from them or anything like that. They expected me to go to their website, somehow find them. This was a few years ago, and review their policies, except they never told me they had any or that I was supposed to do that. And then they held me accountable to great expense to me for that. And it ended the relationship for me because I was like, I'm not gonna be held accountable to something that they're saying I should have found on my own by some mysterious magic. It's just they're not a professional. And the idea that the customer's always right isn't true, but they're never at fault, even when they are. And that's because you get to take responsibility. And I say get because, again, it's your gateway to freedom. It's your gateway to all the things you need to do. It begins with responsibility. Anytime you're blaming somebody for anything, you've lost all the power and you've got no place to go. Responsibility does not equal fault or blame, by the way. It means responsible, able to respond. You're okay, what do I do now? What can I do now? What's within my power? When you blame people, that percentage diminishes dramatically what's in your power. Be vigilant about personal versus practical. Notice when you're collapsing them. Are you taking something personal that you don't need to be? Are you making it mean something about yourself? Do you have your validation out there? Are you looking for approval, or are you hurt by disapproval? If somebody says something about the way you're dressed, does it make you cry? Or if somebody or do you feel insulted, or what have you? Or do you just think they're weird and it doesn't matter what they think? Or and again, it's a spectrum. And always be developing greater competency. You always want to get better at what you're doing, no matter what it is. I will always be getting better at what I'm doing. I will always be increasing my capacity to witness, even though I've been doing it for so long. I will always be looking for, I'm still creating new distinctions in self-esteem. And I've been, working with this stuff for about 20 years now with self-esteem, and just finding, well, there's this other subtlety and this other subtlety. And always looking for where my growth edge is. And it may be something really gross. Maybe, gosh, there's this area I'm just not competent in at all. Or it might be something really subtle. Only certain people notice it, or only I notice it on certain situations and like that, but I'm still working on it. There's a couple things I've noticed. One is that a Kung Fu master isn't declared a master by himself, right? And you don't declare yourself enlightened, even though I've met some people who have actually explicitly said they're enlightened. I think that's great. I think we need to talk about what enlightened means, what the definition is. For me, it means you're completely free of any triggers. You don't get triggered at all. And any time, I encourage you to take this principle on, again, for your own development, and this will serve you so well in business. Anytime you're upset at all, it's pointing to some unresolved issue within yourself, likely a self-esteem issue, maybe an event from your past that needs to be cleared out. Those are the two places we look. And you do that until you're free of all triggers. That is an infinite game worth playing. You asked a question. Yeah. Been in relative isolation the last months and getting to witness and feeling a lot, but I do judge myself and have little or no compassion for myself. Do you have any tips on starting a self-compassion habit? Yes. Find a mirror. And actually, there's a few things. If you have access to a bathtub, take a bath, and when you're bathing yourself, make sure that your hands are very loving. So anytime softly, sweetly, almost, you want to really care for yourself in that way. Same thing, like if you apply lotion, do that the same way. Make sure that your movements are very slow, movements are very loving, and also anytime you do something, and you probably have a voice in your head that judges you, right? Like, I can't believe you did that, or who knows what the voice is. There's probably some critical voice. And so what you want to do is simply begin to play with that voice. Now, you can do some things with it. You can alter its voice. You can turn to a cartoon character. You can do all sorts of little things with it. I found that location matters. There's usually a location it's coming from, like it's coming from back here, or it's coming from up above. And if you change the location, usually send it far away and down near the floor. And you'll find it just has less emotional power over you. But you want to start, as a habit, saying positive things to yourself. And I almost don't care what they are, but just say positive things to yourself. And you do it in this way, though. Like I said earlier, find a mirror. And I just recommend people do this every day if you have the opportunity. Find a mirror and pick one eye. It's a more direct gaze. So just stare into one eye and use you. And, I love you, or you're doing as well as you can, whatever you want to say, anything that you need to hear, believe, or accept about yourself that to be true, but you have some difficulty with it. It's valid. I'm not saying, you don't want to. So I don't like affirmations. I don't think that they're effective to use affirmations like I'm, making this much money when you're actually not, because there's a part of you going, no, you're not. Right? We're dealing with facts. So you could be on your way to making that much money, or you could be on your way to developing this capacity in romance, or in love, or sexually, or energetically, or you could be on your way, but you don't say it as if it's already occurred. there's ways to do that, to use the power of your unconscious mind, that's much more effective than affirmations. So just want to separate out what I'm suggesting. Separate that from affirmations. It's not. It is not that. It is saying something from a different perceptual position that you can receive because you know the person saying it. There are some clients who I've just had stand in front of a mirror and say, "I love you," and you know, and usually they cry the first few times because they really need to hear that, and you know, they've been hard on themselves. And I never suggest anybody pass up an opportunity to look in a mirror and say, "I love you." So, and a deep, you know, love, not, "Oh, I'm so awesome," you know, not like that, but like really, like you appreciate, love, care for, deeply the person you're looking at, and that person is you. The most important relationship you'll ever develop, and the only relationship, you know, it'll be your longest relationship, and there's no divorce, which is funny. You can't divorce yourself. You can marry yourself. I've known someone like that, but could. There is no issue that will come up with clients, by the way, you know, whether it's around money or whether it's around something they say or don't say, or something they hold you accountable to that you didn't think you were going to, that isn't going to somehow impact your opportunity to view yourself in some way. And you can take that in or not. I recommend that whatever it is, you take responsibility. Now, I want to warn you, if you take responsibility out loud, there are people, most people, will use that as an opportunity to feel better than you. And they'll step into it. Yeah, that's right. You know, and they start to blame you when you're taking responsibility. They start to make sure you're shouldering fault. Take notice and just don't do it out loud with them again in the future, because it's a vulnerable act and it's a personal act anyway. You're doing it for your own personal evolution. Now, will they get space when you take responsibility? Does somebody, you know, get grace, unmerited mercy? Yeah, sure, of course. You don't do it for them, though. You do it for you. And with clients, you want to be careful because you don't want the dynamic to shift. You don't want it to flip. You want to make sure that you're staying in the, I don't want to use the word dominant, but you know, you're the one in authority. You want to, that's not the right word either, but you know, there's a certain development, a certain dynamic in the relationship that if that flips, it becomes messy and you have to, you know, clean it up. It's like, who's coaching who here? Or who's healing who, or, you know, I'm sure you've all had one of those clients, or you've heard about one of those clients who sort of flip the dynamic. But you want to be cautious about that. You want to be cautious, and just keep it in mind. You know, keep it in mind that most people are looking for pseudo self-esteem. Pseudo self-esteem is, I have this much money, so I'm you know, a good person, or I'm better than you, so I'm a good person, or I'm worse than you, so I'm a horrible person, or and all those self to other comparisons, by the way, we all know those are pretty much useless because there's always somebody better and there's always somebody worse. But the more insidious, the more subtle and insidious version of it is, I compare myself to an ideal self that I invented, and then I'm judging myself for not living up to it. But it's a complete invention on my part. You know, it's not sometimes people don't even realize that they've created this idealized self. You want to compare yourself to yourself through time in the present. That's it. You know, the idea of where you should be, or, you know, I get this a lot with people that are like, oh, you know, I should be further along right now. According to who? Like, which outline are you looking at? You know, you are where you are, and that's the only place you can be. And the idea really is to be in the present while keeping an eye on the future and learning from the past. That's your appropriate relationship to time, which is an internal structure. It's an internal subjective structure, intrasubjective structure, just like compassion is an intrasubjective structure. It's something we experience internally. So is our experience of time. So, okay. Any other questions? Wait. Here are the 6 pillars of self-esteem by Dr. Nathaniel Branden. By the way, fantastic book, The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, also available on audio, read by the author. He sounds like he's reading. So I really didn't care for it the first time through. The second time through, though, I felt really fond of it. So I don't know what to make of that. But the Six Pillars is a book I think every human should read. It's there's about a half dozen books I think every human should read. This is one of them. I've read it a few times. The Six Pillars of Self-Esteem. Here are the six pillars: the practice of living consciously, the practice of self-acceptance, the practice of self-responsibility, the practice of self-assertiveness, which is simply to ask for what you want, by the way, not being overly assertive, but just, expressing your needs. The practice of living purposefully, and the practice of personal integrity, keeping your agreements. Living consciously, having self-acceptance, taking responsibility, asserting your needs, expressing yourself, living purposefully, and having integrity, keeping your agreements. These are the six pillars of self-esteem. You'll all excel in one area or the other, and have deficiencies in one area or the other. When I met Dr. Brandon, I met him a couple times, and the second time I was meeting with a friend, and my friend was sort of he was like giggly like a schoolgirl that he was meeting Dr. Brandon, right? And he was blushing and dropping stuff, and I was like, geez, I've never seen a guy like this. I'm like, so I just sort of sat back. I was amused by it, and I was letting him interact, and because I'd already met him and we'd spoken at some length, and he at the end of the meeting, it was after he gave a talk, and he always has one screwdriver after he talks, or had, vodka and orange juice. He finishes his drink, he sets it down, and goes, Jason, I'm going to give you one more chance. You need to work on your self-assertiveness. And he walks off. Right? That's your pillar to work on. That was about 15 years ago. But it certainly stuck with me. And it's subtleties. Like I don't stuff my needs. I express my needs, or I was expressing them at the time. But could I be doing it more? Should I be doing it more? Are there times when I don't express what I need because of something about, do I fear how they're going to react? Which is, it means how does that relate to self-esteem? Me fearing how they're going to react? I'm not sure I'm competent to deal with their reaction, right? It's knowledge of my competence. I'm not sure I'm competent, or that I want to, right? Or maybe for some people, it's that they're not sure they really deserve that thing enough to assert it. Do you deserve it or not? Or feel worthy of receiving it. So self-assertiveness can show up in really subtle ways. And then there are times where your needs just aren't that important, and that's fine. You don't need to make sure. But if you feel you're deficient in that area, or maybe you're blaming people a lot, and you need to start taking responsibility for everything you can. And it's going to be grueling at first. It'll be very difficult. Client does something silly, dumb, and you're like, no, that's just dumb. I shouldn't have to take responsibility for it. I shouldn't have to tell them that. Well, there are no everybody should knows in the current climate where we're multicultural or global. I mean, I've met people who they grew up in the same town, went to the same church, and they have different ideas about what a relationship is. And certainly somebody from another country and another culture, another religion is going to have very different ideas about what professional is, and where boundaries are, and whether you can touch people or not, and where, and all those things. And all those things need to be carefully framed. You need to take responsibility for framing those for them as a professional matter. And self-acceptance, which one way to think about it is that you're simply not in conflict with yourself. You're not working against yourself, that you are fully supporting of yourself. And consciously, we can always increase our awareness, our consciousness. Living purposefully, if you're a solopreneur, if you're a healer, you're already doing that. The question is just to what degree, and can you increase that? There are times where I am absolutely not on purpose, completely. And there are times when I'm, insanely so. And when and where is that, and to what percentage, and all of that. And personal integrity, which I think is just simple enough to, how much are you in alignment with the things that you know to be true, the things that you assert, and the things your behavior suggests, and how much do those come into alignment? Keeping your agreements is pretty basic. Or acknowledge when you didn't, maybe you just forgot. Simple as that. But you own it. You own it because you take responsibility. Those are the six pillars. Good stuff. Any questions? Any questions about any of the self-esteem material? The six pillars, the four quadrants, the definitions, personal and practical. You're very welcome. You're very welcome. In March, if nobody has any questions about self-esteem, I'm just going to talk quickly about the course. We're a little bit over time. Can't remember if I said this would be an hour and 90 minutes, but I was going for an hour. But very quickly, there's you'll get an email tonight pointing you to the website. But if you're a sexual healer or a coach or healer in the domain of love, relationships like that, then I've got a course coming up in March, the B School for Sexual Healers. If any of you know Destin, if you know Traumica, they were clients of mine several years ago. It's sort of where they got their business start. They've gone on to other things as well, but I'm very proud to have them as clients. If you know them, most of this crowd does know them. There are others as well, but those are the two that come to mind with this particular group. Traumica and I, in fact, will be doing a webinar, or you'll hear from Traumica about some webinars coming up. So here are the dates for the course. It's March 21st and 22nd, April 18th and 19th, May 16th and 17th, June 13th and 14th, and July 11th and 12th. And the intention of the course is to have you have everything that you need to have a six-figure practice, to be making over 108,000 a year with the way the numbers work out, as a good starting point, to give you everything you need to do that, so that your income is stable, so that you stop having these huge waves of income and not, and some people, they're trying to get out of hands-on work and they end up violating their own boundaries. They go back to doing that because it's easy and quick money and all those things that come up, and then they have physical symptoms that arise. It's also all very interesting and all things I've experienced as well. But there was nobody teaching people how to build a business, holistic practitioners. And there's very few, if any, teaching sexual healers. And I think the work that you guys do is so critical, so important. And I was lucky, if any of you have read that part of my bio, my sexual education began at the age of 8 with an all-night conversation with my dad. And very few people are that blessed to have that kind of, environment. Usually, they develop shame early on because they touch themselves somewhere and it's dirty or something like that. And I had sort of the opposite experience. And I have it that if we free people, that they are free and they're fully alive, we're going to have a much better planet. And I hope to assist you in impacting more people so that we can have a more hospitable environment and we can be having a lot more fun, a lot more pleasure, and a lot more prosperity. So you'll be hearing about that this evening from me in an email. If you register for this course, you'll hear, or this webinar, you'll hear about it. And the next webinar, I believe it's on June 7th, but don't quote me on that. You'll see something about that as well. If there's no other questions, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to contribute to you. And by the way, your self-worth is a settled matter. Your value is up for debate. We have to set those rates, but your self-worth is a settled matter. You are divinity.